In this episode of the Discover the Word podcast, you'll discover how sneezes are a part of the miraculous life of Elisha. Really, sneezes. Make sure you're in your spot at the table as we explore some of the strange details, like sneezes, in the miraculous life of Elisha that point toward God's provision for us even today. It's another interesting hour of conversations on Discover the Word, beginning now. And that means it's time for you to pull your chair up to the table with Mark DeHaan and Elisa Morgan and Bill Crowder as they pick up a series of conversations about the miraculous life of Elisha. Now, Elisha was one of the earliest prophets who lived in the northern part of Israel about 800 or so years before Christ. And as the name of the series suggests, his was a very interesting life. It's a fascinating drama that we're excited to get back into and discover how the miraculous life of Elisha can help us understand how God may be at work in our lives. Discover the Word is Bible engagement in the form of a group Bible study from Our Daily Bread Ministries. And we're up to part 3 of a 7-part series of conversations the group is having centered around this miraculous life of Elisha. Now, Mart is leading Elisa and Bill in this look at the important role Elisha's life and ministry has in the bigger story that the Bible is telling. And so we've been stressing how reading backward and reading forward is so crucial in how we read. Now, they'll review some of the things we've talked about in parts 1 and 2 in just a moment, and then they'll push ahead to a story that's recorded in 2 Kings in the Bible's Old Testament. And they'll spend much of this part of the study looking at some of the miracles God allowed Elisha to perform in relation to a woman and her family from the town of Shunem. And so to begin, we're going to discover that while giving was a strength for this Shunammite woman, receiving was not necessarily something she did all that well, because sure, greed and willingness to always take, that can be a negative. But an unwillingness to receive, that can be a signal that pride and maybe an overly self-sufficient spirit is at work. But we're going to see that despite that, God several times worked in her life in a miraculous way through Elisha. And so, Mart, lead us back into this.
We've all heard that it's better to give than to receive. But I've wondered at times what it would be like to go out in the street or go to your friends or go to strangers and say, do you buy that, that it's better to give than to receive?
I like to give rather than receive because I think receiving is humbling and it's a little bit vulnerable, and giving is a little bit more in control.
Yeah, I think it's the idea of it's easier to give than to receive, because to receive is acknowledging need, acknowledging a certain amount of inability maybe, or emptiness or whatever. And I agree. I think it's much easier to give, and in some ways because of that, much more fun.
Okay, let's go with your instincts that there is a sense in which it's easier to give than to receive, because that really ties into a story in the life of Elisha.
Okay.
We know that Elijah and Elisha, and we've talked in previous conversations, we kind of get those mixed up. The names sound a lot alike, but they're two different prophets who appeared in the 9th century before Christ to call the nation of Israel back to the one true God. Only about 150 years had passed since King David and Solomon, but the nation had really unraveled. It was divided now, and the northern part of the nation, Israel or Ephraim, really had become very idolatrous. And so these prophets were raised up by God and called by him to call the nation back to himself. With the passing of Elijah, now the responsibility and the call is passed along to Elisha. And we've been looking together at some of the miraculous things that happened in his life and in his interactions with individuals and with kings of the north part of this divided nation. What I'd like to do today is look at 2 Kings chapter 4 and verses 8 through 17. We've been taking these sort of as separate episodes in the life of Elisha. We're up to a story now about how Elisha is befriended by a well-to-do woman, and she's living in the town of Shunem. It's up in the northern part of Israel. It's to the southwest of the Galilee, and it's not too far from Mount Carmel. And that kind of plays into the story because Elijah we know was associated with Mount Carmel. That's where he confronted the prophets of Baal and called fire out of the sky. And he mentored Elisha, and Elisha ended up also having a relationship with the people of that region, and he would travel back and forth, and we'll see how that shows up. But let's read together the story. Actually, what I'd like to do is take 3 conversations to work through this story of what we'll call the Shunammite woman. She's intriguing, and Elisa, I'm especially interested to see how you will relate to her.
Me too.
Okay? Why don't you start reading, Elisa, at verse 8 of 2 Kings chapter 4.
One day Elisha went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there, who urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed and a table, a chair, and a lamp for him, and then he can stay there whenever he comes to us.
Bill, why don't you pick up at that point?
One day Elisha returned to Shunem, and he went up to this upper room to rest. He said to his servant Gehazi, Tell the woman from Shunem I want to speak to her. When she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, Tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you have shown us. What can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army?
She replied, I have a home among my own people. What can be done for her? Elisha asked, and Gehazi said, Well, she has no son, and her husband is old. And then Elisha said, Call her. And so he called her, and she stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you will hold a son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Don't mislead your servant, O man of God. But the woman became pregnant. And the next year, about that same time, she gave birth to a son just as Elisha had told her.
Okay, now let's first of all put this in context. Do you remember the previous miracle to the miracle of the Shunammite woman?
Was it the one about the oil?
Yeah, there was another woman, and she had 2 sons.
She didn't have a husband.
He had died.
And she had 2 boys.
And she had 2 boys, and what we're told is that he apparently was a spiritual man. He was known as one of the sons of the prophets. He had been associated with Elisha.
Her husband.
Her husband.
Okay.
And he died, and he left her a widow with 2 boys. And what do we know about her?
She ran out of money and she ran out of funds. She had nothing left except a little bit of oil.
She was desperate.
Desperate.
And she said the creditor was at the door, and he had threatened to take her 2 boys
As slaves.
as slaves to pay off the debt. So how would we compare or contrast that woman and that story with this one?
And by the way, Elisha provided for her miraculously.
Yeah, miraculously. God provided
for
for her
Yeah.
in her poverty.
I think it's more of a contrast than a comparison when you look at the 2 women. One of them had a husband and sons. The other had a husband and no son. One of them had nothing. The other had everything.
That's a good point.
So there's really a contrast between them. But the point of pressure comes when the first woman, the woman with the oil miracle, is threatened with the loss of her sons, and the other woman is threatened with the gift of a son.
Yeah.
She takes it almost like a threat, doesn't she?
That's
Yeah.
great because she says, I don't need anything. I have my own people. They'll provide for me. I have a home there.
Yeah. If you read it in the New Living Translation, it says, no, she replied, my family takes good care of me.
Oh.
So she resisted this idea. So really, the first woman, she had nothing,
Yeah.
or very, very little, not enough to live on. This woman has so much that when Elisha wants to repay her for her kindness, for taking him into their home and building this room for him whenever he was coming by, he said, can't I put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army? I mean, Elisha knew people in high places, and her response was, no, I've got everything
So she's
I
much
need.
more comfortable giving than receiving.
And also, I think there may be a sense of she's given up. She knows her husband's old. She doesn't see children in her future. I have my husband. He's my family.
I'm settling.
Yeah.
There's no more I can have. That's a good insight.
You really feel that she does find it easier to give than to receive. And you think it might be because she has longings that she's given up on.
And you get that implication in verse 16 when she says, no, don't deceive me and get my hopes up like that.
Yeah, and if she hadn't already been disappointed, she would be probably excited. It's after we've tasted disappointment that we just don't want to go to hope again, isn't it? Our first time around with hope, we're hopeful. But after we've hoped and prayed for something and we haven't received it, we get a little gun shy.
Yeah. I wonder how many of us are like that.
Yeah? Why are you looking at me?
Because I'm wondering how you're relating to
Yeah.
this Shunammite woman
I
who
do.
was married to an older man. Apparently he was a wealthy man.
Yeah.
She was well off. She found it comfortable to be a woman of hospitality, to welcome this man of God. There's a sense in which she seems to have a heart for spiritual things. She makes a comment. She talks to her husband. This is a man of God. Let's
She
make a place.
recognizes that.
So there's a lot to be said for this woman. She's a noble woman. She's a wealthy woman. She's apparently come to terms with her inability to have a child. Rather than living and wallowing in what she hasn't been able to have, she said, we've been given a lot, let's give out of that. But Elisha comes into her life, and apparently, I think, and you've already indicated, awakens something in her, a longing that now frightens her.
Yeah. When we look at the scriptures, we know the stories of women like Hannah and like Sarah, who were childless. And we know from looking at the scriptures that in that culture, that was one of the greatest ways that a woman found worth, was in having children. And when you hear her say, no, this is my family, no, don't get my hopes up, you feel that same kind of emptiness that you hear a Hannah in 1 Samuel 1 offering, don't you?
Right.
You do, or Sarah with Abraham, and so much that she laughed. It seems so preposterous to her. But we do all relate to this. We want to be in a relationship with a God who gifts us with the unimaginable, but we also are floored when he actually shows up in such a way to offer such gifts to us. I mean, even look at Mary, the mother of Jesus. She was floored.
Right.
So God's beautiful gifts often come to us in an unexpected moment. And what do
Right.
we do with them?
Right.
And how do we receive them?
Yeah.
And I think for her, Elisha's offering her this wonderful gift, and she doesn't know how to respond. She really doesn't. And I think, to your point, Elisa, I think it really is testimony to the fact that past disappointment can really impact how we do even the little things in life, like receiving a gift. What if it's not what I wanted? What if it's not what I hoped for? I mean, doesn't that happen every year at Christmas time? Where we're afraid to give gifts sometimes because we're afraid, what if it's not what they really want? And we're afraid to open gifts, and we try to get our face right so that if it's not what we were looking for, we still present some kind of a happy front.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Right, it is. So I think at the very, very least, and again, we want to take 3 different conversations, 2 more after this with this story. But at the very least, we seem to see here indication that sometimes our buried longings, those unexpressed desires that we have, need to be awakened to expand our vision of God. And that's what I think we're going to be seeing happening in this woman's life.
Good caution as we get back into our series about the miraculous life of Elisha here on Discover the Word, because it can take courage to awaken a sleeping dream. Self-protection, self-sufficiency, that can get in the way of our faith and trust in God. But just as God sent Elisha, the prophet, to this Shunammite woman, he also has a way of sending the right person at the right time to us, doesn't he? Big question then is, how will we respond? Well, we just saw that this woman from Shunem, who was not able to have children, now is. And because of her dedication to God and Elisha, she's blessed with a son. It's another of those miraculous birth stories that appear throughout the Bible. But then something happens, something that could almost be described as a cruel joke that God seems to be playing on this woman who didn't dare get her hopes up about having a child until God miraculously provided. And right in the middle of this is Elisha.
Have you ever bumped into one of these sites on the internet that has videos of cruel jokes?
Wow.
Setting people up for something that either just scares the wits out of them or something that gets their hopes all up and then just, pops the bubble.
Ooh.
How do you feel about cruel jokes?
I think they're cruel. I mean, I really do. I think that we need to be wise in how we do stuff like that because, funny's funny, but funny at somebody else's expense.
What do we get
funny.
out of it?
Well, you're not talking about like slapstick stuff. You're
No,
talking
I'm
about...
talking about cruel.
Not
that
the
has a
banana peel.
mean-spirited. Sometimes, a lot of effort is put into setting a person up. There was one story about a single mom. Her friends, got together and they rigged things up so that she thought she had won the lottery. They actually printed a fake lottery ticket. And she thought she was suddenly a millionaire. And I mean, there's this video of her she's absolutely beside herself.
Of course.
And then she finds out it was just a joke.
Oh, man.
Yeah, see, to me, that's not a joke. A joke is something that's supposed to end up with everybody laughing.
Yeah.
That's not funny.
Okay, the reason I wanted to talk about it is because there's a story in the Old Testament. It shows up in one of the episodes of the life of the prophet Elisha. And it almost seems like God is playing a cruel joke on a woman. We started talking about it in our last conversation. It's the woman of Shunem, this town in the northern part of Israel. We're taking her story in 3 parts. What would you tell me about this woman?
She's well-to-do, and she's married to an
She's
older
married,
man.
childless,
Okay.
but she has spiritual sensitivity because she's welcomed Elisha and his servant into their home. They've even built quarters for them in their home so that they have a place to stay where they can come and
They
be
travel a
cared for.
lot, so when they're on the road, they can stay there.
Yeah.
And when Elisha wants to do something nice for her or give back to her, he asks what he can do, and she's like, oh, I'm fine. I've got my own family to take care of me.
And she is a woman of means.
It's like she doesn't need anything. And yet Gehazi, the servant, recognizes she doesn't have any children, and her husband is old, so she's likely not to have any children. And Elisha begins to say, well, you know what? We're going to give you a child, or God's going to give you a child.
And her reaction is what?
Don't do this to me. Don't get my hopes up.
Why not?
Well, obviously she's been disappointed before. Otherwise, she wouldn't say, don't get my hopes up.
Yeah. And a year later, a child is born. So let's pick up the story at that point, okay? At 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 18 through 28. And Elisa, would you start reading and then Bill pick up?
Okay.
One day when her child was older, he went out to help his father, who was working with the harvesters. Suddenly he cried out, my head hurts, my head hurts. His father said to one of the servants, carry him home to his mother. And so the servant took him home, and his mother held him on her lap. But around noontime, he died. She carried him up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and then shut the door and left him there. She sent a message to her husband, send one of the servants and a donkey so that I can hurry to the man of God and come right back. Why go today? He asked. It is neither a new moon festival nor a Sabbath. But she said, it will be all right.
Bill, pick it up at there.
So she saddled the donkey and said to the servant, hurry, don't slow down unless I tell you to. As she approached the man of God at Mount Carmel, Elisha saw her in the distance. He said to Gehazi, look, the woman from Shunem is coming. Run out to meet her and ask her, is everything all right with you, your husband, and your child? Yes, the woman told Gehazi, everything is fine.
But when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she fell to the ground before him and caught hold of his feet. And Gehazi began to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is deeply troubled, but the Lord has not told me what this is. Then she said, did I ask you for a son, my Lord? And didn't I say, don't deceive me and get my hopes up?
A lot of pain there.
There is a lot of pain, and that pain is in contrast to what about the woman's spirit or temperament or personality? What did we note about her in our last conversation that shows up again here in this reading?
That she's protected, that she has held her heart carefully from disappointment. A well-to-do woman who doesn't really need anybody.
And how does she show that?
Well, she showed her protectedness and her caution by refusing the child to begin with. And now she goes back to those initial emotions. Didn't I tell you? Didn't I beg you?
Yeah.
Don't do this to me. Don't do this to me. I can't take one more disappointment.
And the fact that she was a well-to-do person, she had everything she needed. She lived with her family. Her husband was wealthy. So when Elisha wanted to give her a gift to express his gratitude for them providing Elisha and his servant with a place to stay when they were on the road, she said, I have everything I need. He said, what if I put in a good word for you with the king or with the military? No, I've got everything I need. And here again, did you notice in the story as it played out, how many times she said, it's all right, it's okay.
Yeah, everything's fine.
Everything's fine. And this was after she saw that her son
Was dead.
was dead.
And I wonder if some of that isn't maybe a little bit of denial on her part. I lived without a son for a long time. I can do it again. And she's really kind of pushing down the real emotions that seem to come out when Elisha probes a little bit more deeply into her heart. We do that. We kind of go into denial and pretend that we don't feel the hurt that we feel, but it's really there.
Can I poke at this just a little bit? Is there a way that we can read this and see that she was a woman of faith? That she absolutely didn't doubt that God could somehow heal this child? It's all right. Everything's fine. Didn't I say, please don't deceive me and get my hopes up? Is there a way she could be trusting that that's heard?
Well, let's try it.
It makes me wonder.
Well, let's try that. What does she do when the child dies? What's the first thing she does?
She takes him straight to the bed of Elisha.
She lays the child on the bed, closes the door, and then she goes to her husband, who apparently is out in the field. Mm-hmm. She tells him she's going where?
To get Elisha.
Who is at Carmel, okay? Mm-hmm. And he wants to know, well, why now? She says, it's all right.
It's all right.
Okay? So you're saying maybe she just knows that God can raise him from the dead.
Okay, now let me push back on that a little bit. Maybe she was just superstitious. Maybe she thought, well, this man who's done so many amazing things, maybe there's some magical thing. I mean, you think in the New Testament where people were bringing handkerchiefs to Paul for him to touch, to take to sick people, so there are a lot of unusual things. I'm not saying she was superstitious. I think, what if she was a little bit superstitious about this miraculous man who lived on her roof sometimes?
Okay. What she did know that this child was given to her by God, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she had been childless. It was a miracle. She knew that. This is our child from God. Now he's died. Now, Elisa, you're saying maybe she's just a woman of faith. It's all right. I'm okay. It's good. It's just an expression of her calm before God as she relies on him, right?
Maybe receiving the child, as we've talked about, was a turning point for her. I don't know.
There very well may have been some of that in her, but where do we kind of see that may not be the whole story?
Verse 28.
What happened in verse 28?
In verse 28, then she said, did I ask you for a son, my Lord? And didn't I say, don't deceive me and get my hopes up?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it'd be too harsh to say she's not a woman of faith, because she's shown spiritual sensitivity in a variety of ways. And I don't think that it's fair to say to her she's probably just being superstitious. But I think there's mixed emotions here.
Okay, Elisa, pick it up. Just go back and go a couple of sentences before that and read verse 27.
But when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she fell to the ground before him and caught hold of his feet. Gehazi began to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She's deeply troubled, but the Lord has not told me what it is. And then she said, did I ask you for a son, my Lord? And didn't I say, don't deceive me and get my hopes up?
Does that sound like pure faith, pure trust?
It's interesting because when I read the whole grabbing his feet, I think of the woman with the bleed in the New Testament grabbing a hold of Jesus' feet. But, I really do hear what you're saying, too, that maybe she's in a crisis of faith.
And again, I think this is the way most of us live out our faith. Most of us, our faith is mingled with whatever else is going on in the moment. Most of us don't live a life of pure faith. We live a life like this, where we bounce back and forth emotionally, and it impacts how we view and trust God.
And it had to be intermingled, because she knew this was a child of God. There had to be that faith. She knew that God had given her this child. But now, the very fact that she falls down and she's beside herself, she finally lets it out. These emotions and this sense of disappointment.
But she knows where to go. But
she doesn't know yet how it's going to turn out.
And that's the life of faith, too, because we walk by faith, not by sight.
Right. And we walk in the moment. And I think one of the things we learn from this story after this point is that when it appears that God has played a cruel joke on us, we need to remember that we're still in the middle of a far greater story. We're not there yet. We don't know what's going to happen. Now, we've read the story. We know the scriptures. We know what's going to happen at the end. She didn't. But we can learn from her that maybe our friends are going through things that are just beyond their ability to handle. They're beside themselves. They're trying to hold it together. They're covering it up. But inside, there's this desperation. They're reaching out. They want to find something they can hang on to. And maybe we can say that from this story, at the very least, let's remember that when it looks like God has played a cruel joke, we're not there yet. We're not to the end of the story.
So true, isn't it? It's easy to come to the wrong conclusions when we're in the middle of our story. But having the faith to remember that, as Mart said, it's not the end of the story. God is a God of mercy, and there's a redemptive future that God himself has prepared for us. And that's so often what it means to be a person of faith. Okay, so let me ask you this question. You've heard of the 7 seals in the book of Revelation, the 7 deadly sins, Snow White and the 7 dwarves. Well, next, they're going to talk about an odd chapter in the ongoing story of Elisha and this Shunammite woman. Be prepared to say Gesundheit 7 times after we take a short break. Now, Discover the Word is part of Our Daily Bread Ministries, and we're on a mission to fuel Bible engagement for life around the world. In addition to our radio programs and podcasts, we also have video resources. We publish books and devotionals and a lot more. And so let me take just a moment to tell you more about our online Christian learning called Artos Academy. Artos Academy is committed to enriching and equipping the global church through affordable and accessible online courses and programs and learning resources. Previously known as Our Daily Bread University, for over 20 years, people have been deepening their biblical knowledge, leaning into their ministry roles, and growing in their personal relationship with Jesus through these courses. Artos Academy offers online courses, specialized programs, and interactive learning resources around the world in multiple languages. You can pick the option that works best for you to participate, with free access to a limited selection of our courses, an affordable subscription to access the full course selection, or a discounted volume subscription for groups. I hope you'll explore all that Artos Academy has to offer. There will be a link to their website in our show notes for this week, and you can also visit them directly at artosacademy.org. That's Artos, A-R-T-O-S, artosacademy.org. So have you ever been around someone who just went into a sneezing fit? Ever had that happen to you? Yeah, sneezes are so different, aren't they? Loud and violent, dainty and quiet, always 2 at a time or 3 at a time. Well, believe it or not, sneezes are going to be part of this conversation we're having on Discover the Word. 7 sneezes are a puzzling detail in the story that we're looking at. Seriously, sneezes, 7 of them, are part of the miraculous life of Elisha. And so in that last segment, we focused on when God supernaturally seems to provide a son for a woman from Shunem who befriends and helps Elisha. But in what almost seems like a divine cruel joke, this miraculously provided only son dies. However, when we closed that previous part of the conversation, Mart was saying that this is not the end of the story, even though death so often is. In this case, we're talking about the miraculous life of Elisha.
I know that you both read a lot. Tell us again, what kinds of stories, what kinds of books do you like to read?
Well, I like to read fiction, stuff like John Grisham and stuff like that.
All right, Elisa?
I love fiction. I love a good novel, and I like historical novels, that take you back to a certain time and help you learn about history while you're enjoying a story.
Do you ever read a story with just a bad ending? The one that
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it's
Mostly true stories have bad endings.
Yes.
Okay, that's why you read fiction, right?
Even
right.
fiction does. I read a story that had the worst ending. Honestly, I sat in a chair and I read the ending like 10 different times thinking maybe it'll turn out different this time.
Yeah, and it didn't.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So frustrating.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
What do we call stories that end with just an awful ending?
Bad.
Bad. Tragedy.
Yeah.
certain
tragedy.
Yeah.
Maybe the classic example, that's Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The great Shakespeare play.
So
Yeah.
tragic.
If a story has awful things happening in the middle and then ended good,
Then they seem redemptive.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be a redemptive story.
Okay.
Yeah.
but if good things are happening and then it ends bad, it's a whole different animal.
Infuriating.
It is, okay. Some people, it seems, really advocate and love high literature that ends up with realism rather than the happy romantic ending, right? We've been looking at a chapter in the life of Elisha the prophet in the Old Testament that has a lot of those elements. And in our last conversation, we're actually taking 3 different conversations to work through this one story. Our last conversation I would characterize as tragic, right?
Yes.
Summarize quickly the story of the Shunammite woman. What do we know about it, just in a few sentences?
The Shunammite woman was a wealthy married woman with an older husband but no children.
Yeah.
She wants to do some things for Elisha, the prophet.
Woman of great hospitality.
And she recognizes he's the holy man of God, so she builds a room for him in her home.
Yeah, so there's some spirituality there too.
Some kind of
Not just
connection.
wealth,
Yeah.
but there's a heart for God.
And Elisha through his servant, says, "What can we do for you?" And she says, "Nothing, I'm fine." And then he says, "No, you need a child." And she almost panics
Yeah.
with, "Don't disappoint me. Don't get my hopes up again."
Right. That was our first conversation. Second conversation, what happened?
The boy suddenly dies,
Yeah. At about 12 years of age.
and she runs to Elisha.
Who was
to
at
ask him to
apparently
help.
Mount Carmel, associated with Elijah the prophet. It was on top of Mount Carmel that he called down fire and defeated the prophets of Baal, showed that the one true God, the God of Israel, is God. So she runs to Carmel, she runs to Elisha, and she tells him what?
That the boy is dead.
The
And
boy
she
is
says, why
dead.
did you?
Why did you get
Yeah.
my hopes up
Well,
like this?
she doesn't really say that. She says, I told you I didn't want to get my hopes up.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's an interesting little detail that we didn't talk about yesterday, but when she sends to her husband to make preparations to go to Elisha, the husband says, "Why are you going? What's the problem?" And she says, "Nothing's wrong."
And
Yeah.
yet, the last time the husband saw the child, he had this horrible headache, and the husband sends him home. It's odd that he doesn't ask, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. There's a lot happening there, but you're right. She's not only wealthy, she's not only got a spirituality to her, but she's got this strong sense of
That's
composure. She pulls it all together, and she seems to be able to put the best face on things until she gets to Carmel. She falls at Elisha's feet. She grabs him, and she's beside herself. And then the story comes out. Let's pick it up at that point today, okay? And we'll look at really the rest of the story as it's told in 2 Kings chapter 4. And today let's just look at verses 29 through 37. And Bill, why don't you start reading, and then Lisa pick it up.
Then Elisha said to Gehazi,
The servant, his servant, right?
"Get ready to travel. Take my staff and go. Don't talk to anyone along the way. Go quickly and lay the staff on the child's face." But the boy's mother said, "As surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I won't go home unless you go with me." So Elisha returned with her. Gehazi hurried on ahead and laid the staff on her child's face, but nothing happened. There was no sign of life. He returned to meet Elisha and told him, "The child is still dead."
Lisa, pick it up there.
In verse 32, when Elisha arrived, the child was indeed dead, lying there on the prophet's bed. He went in alone and shut the door behind him and prayed to the Lord. And then he lay down on the child's body, placing his mouth on the child's mouth, his eyes on the child's eyes, and his hands on the child's hands. And as he stretched out on him, the child's body began to grow warm again. Elisha got up, walked back and forth across the room once, and then stretched himself out again on the child. This time the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Then Elisha summoned Gehazi. "Call the child's mother," he said. And when she came in, Elisha said, "Here, take your son." She fell at his feet and bowed before him, overwhelmed with gratitude. Then she took her son in her arms and carried him downstairs.
Okay, so this one ends up with a happy ending.
But there's a little weirdness in the middle. I mean, what's with the 7 sneezes?
And what's with him laying on his body?
Okay, yeah.
The laying on his body, I actually kind of get a little bit, because Elijah, the prophet who preceded Elisha, had done almost the exact same thing when raising the child of the widow of Zarephath. So I
Yeah.
get that, but the 7 sneezes.
If you look at the whole story of the Bible and where this all goes, some have thought, ultimately, when Jesus comes to our rescue, he finds us dead in our sins. And there's a sense in which there's this complete embrace, this complete identification with us. He becomes us. He becomes incarnate. So there's some hint that maybe that's where this is looking toward,
It's
this
interesting.
complete embrace, the way Christ embraced us in our
Mouth to mouth,
humanity.
eye to eye, hand to hand.
Very
I know.
graphic.
It's very great. It's too graphic to not mean something.
Yeah.
So maybe we have to say there's a lot of mystery here. We're not sure, but it does seem to indicate this complete embrace and identification. And we know that ultimately that did happen when Jesus became flesh for us. But you're right, Bill. The big question here is, what about the 7 sneezes? I mean, he sneezes 7 times.
Now, we know that Bible scholars view 7 as the number of perfection. The world was created in 6 days. On the 7th day, the Lord rested because it was done. So there's a lot of those kind of analogies to 7 being the number of fulfillment.
Yeah.
I don't know if that has any bearing.
Are there
here.
other references to sneezing?
No, I couldn't find any
Really?
other reference to sneezing.
So what's your take on this?
Well, let's first of all just acknowledge the 7, because
Okay.
this is not incidental. The scripture says, you indicate, Bill, all the way through from Genesis to Revelation. 7 is a number of completeness. It's connected with God. It's associated with the divine. That we know. Okay? That we know. So if that was the case, then the sneezing would say it would be an indication that God has done something. That maybe it means that God has brought this story to completion.
And maybe that would have been more front of mind in their culture, where those things were more accessible to them, those ideas.
The number.
Because we don't think about the numbers
No.
that much in our culture, but they might have been more front of mind in their culture.
They did, yeah. The thing is that it's not explained in the actual biblical text. I mean, the narrative itself does not explain it. So it seems to be maybe something we're supposed to think about. Well, if it is the number of completeness and it's associated with God, maybe. I mean, one possibility is that, okay, this story full of stuffed desire
Oh,
and then
so it came to its
tragedy. I
completion.
mean, if we just look at it in terms of chapters unfolding, and now we're at the end. And at the end, we've got the boy alive again. Now, the sneezing, what do we know about a sneeze? I mean, what is it? It's
expelling, it's releasing pressure.
right.
I have heard, and this may be folklore, but it may be true, that it's one of the times we're closest to death because we stop breathing, our heart takes a jump or something. I don't know the scientific
And I
part
don't
of
know,
it.
I've never studied German. I read somewhere once that Gesundheit means God be with you while the spirits are out.
Yeah.
So there's
and we
something
say,
about a
God bless
connection
So
you.
there could be, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very possible that this is just kind of an unusual way of saying God has touched this woman, brought the story to an end. And now we can look at this whole experience of this woman and her older husband and this child in light of something that God has done.
And that's really good, because yesterday you talked about the fact that when the child was dead and she was hanging on by a thread, that she was still in the middle of the story.
Yeah.
She didn't know what the final chapter was going to be, and now we see the final chapter. And her running to the man of God, representative of seeking God's
Right.
help, really was what pulled her through.
Right. And it brought her from the first miracle of the son being given to her. She was a woman who had been childless. By a miracle, she had a child. The child dies. Now, by a miracle, the child is given back. Whatever else it's saying, it's at least saying that what God begins, God completes. God has a purpose. He had a purpose in allowing her to be childless for those years, and then in awakening desire and giving her a child, allowing that child to die, giving her back. There's a sense in which God's purposes, they have a beginning and they have an end. And in this case, it reminds us that what God is doing ends up being good and reflecting on Him and His love for us.
You're listening to Discover the Word and the lessons we can learn from the miraculous life of Elisha and the 7 sneezes part of the story. That includes this woman and her family from Shunem. And of course, we admit that it's not always easy to see God's redemptive purposes for us when we're in the middle of our story. But we can have confidence that the good work He has begun in us, He will be faithful to complete. Well, has anyone ever told you, hey, if you ever need anything, just let me know? Yeah, we don't often take people up on that offer, do we? Well, in this next part of the story, I think we'll learn an important lesson about how much we really need God's help.
Along the way, someone has said to us, look, Elisa, if you ever need anything, Bill, if you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to call me, right?
Sure. And I've said it to people too.
Yeah.
Have you?
I'm not sure in either direction that it was coming, if it was really meant every time. I mean, sometimes you say it because you don't know what else to say. So you say, well, if you ever need anything, give me a call. When they call, you don't know what to do.
Yeah. Sometimes it seems like when that is said to us, it's kind of like, thank you, but, I doubt that I'll ever need it.
Yeah. In a weird way, it's like if you're really close to somebody, they're not going to say that to you. It's the people that aren't so close that say that, and I would probably never take them up on it. You know what I mean? It's just odd how that is. There's just this level of surfaceness to it.
Now, you said you have offered that to people
I have.
in sincerity or because you didn't know what else to say?
I've meant it sincerely, but I've also said it in situations where I've kind of known they would never take me up on
Yeah.
it.
I remember a friend, and he was a good friend. He fell into a lot of money all of a sudden. It surprised him as much as it surprised anybody. But I remember when it happened, he said to me, Mart, if you ever need, anything, whatever you need, just let me know.
That's a little different.
I felt like he was offering that to me in all good faith. I believe it to this day.
So if you hit a pothole financially, you still remember that, and you can go back
I remember
to that.
it, but I doubt that I would ever do it.
And I think you're right too, Elisa. I think the key to it is the relationship. If we have a relationship with someone, then maybe we feel a little bit more of an open door. Maybe if it's a family member or if it's a parent to a child or something like that, we feel a little bit more free to access that offer than we would if it's just, like you said, somebody who is maybe in our circle of acquaintances, but not really close to us.
Right.
Yeah.
A reason for talking about this is because we've been considering together the story of Elisha and a woman from Shunem. We call her the Shunammite woman, who befriends the prophet Elisha. And tell me the story. What does she and her husband offer Elisha?
They build accommodations for him and his servant at their house, and they offer him a place of refuge and a place where he'll be provided and cared for and things like that.
And he does something nice for her, which is preposterous in so many ways. She's been married a long time to an older man and is childless, and Elisha promises her a child, and she does get pregnant and have a child.
Right. But prior to that, when Elisha wants to express his appreciation for all that she and her husband have done for him and his servant, he says, what can I do for her? And what does she say?
Nothing, I'm fine.
And why does she say that?
Because she's a well-to-do woman, and she thinks she doesn't need anything. But
And
we've
she
talked
says-
about that maybe she's just a little resistant to receiving, too.
Yeah.
But she also says, my family will take care of me.
Right.
Yeah.
And at that point, for whatever her reasons, she declines the offer of help.
If you ever need anything.
Right. But Elisha does what? He insists, as you've indicated, and they recognize together, he and his servant Gehazi recognize that she has no son. Her husband's an older man. And they say, a year from now, you'll have a son. And a year from then, she had a son. Short time later, well, actually 12 years later, what happened?
The boy dies.
The boy dies.
Heartbreak.
Horrible, yes. And she runs to Elisha and asks him for help.
Yeah. And what is the outcome? If we just jump to the end of that story, what's the end of it?
7 sneezes. 7 sneezes, and the boy
Which
comes back
represents
to
what?
life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it represents him coming back to life. And we talked about 7 being the number of completion, and that this kind of completed what God was trying to do in her life through this story.
Yeah, he awakened a desire in her for a child that she apparently had been holding back. And now she had a child, and he's back again. The second miracle, miracle of birth, and now the miracle of resurrection.
Yes.
At that point, and we were in 2 Kings chapter 4, it seemed to be the end of the story.
That's what we would think.
Yeah, but it turns out it wasn't the end of the story. So let's pick up our conversation now with chapter 8 of 2 Kings in the Old Testament. And I want us to read together just 6 verses, verses 1 through 6. Let's see now what the rest of the story is, okay? Elisa, why don't you begin?
Elisha had told the woman whose son he had brought back to life, "Take your family and move to some other place, for the Lord has called for a famine on Israel that will last for 7 years." So the woman did as the man of God instructed, and she took her family and settled in the land of the Philistines for 7 years.
After the famine ended, she returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went to see the king about getting back her house and land. As she came in, the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. The king had just said, "Tell me some stories about the great things Elisha has done." And Gehazi was telling the king about the time Elisha had brought a boy back to life. At that very moment, the mother of the boy walked in to make her appeal to the king about her house and land. "Look, my lord the king," Gehazi exclaimed, "here's the woman now, and this is her son, the very one Elisha brought back to life." "Is this true?" the king asked her, and she told him the story. So he directed one of his officials to see that everything she had lost was restored to her, including the value of any crops that had been harvested during her absence.
It's an amazing epilogue, isn't it? I mean, this is really good.
It's a great stuff. It reminds me of the end of Job. Everything gets given back.
Yeah.
What was lost is found. Almost like the prodigal son and the lost coin and the lost sheep. What was lost is found.
That's right.
Who is this that's giving back?
The king.
The king. You hear any echoes here of what happened earlier in the story?
Elisha asked her if he could put in a good word for her with the king.
Oh, good point.
Yeah, or to a general of the military.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he had friends in high places.
But instead, he put in a good word with God.
Yeah, that's right. But
The other king. There you
But
go.
it's so interesting here. I mean, he says to her earlier in the story, can we do something for you? You've been so kind to us. You've opened up your home. You've given my servant and me this room. We come here at your expense. And what can we do for you? Nothing. Can I put in a good word with the king?
And now he does.
At that point, it must have seemed sort of outrageous, like over the top. I mean, with a king? I mean, why the king? Why the general of the military? I mean, it seems like I don't need that kind of help. I'm with my family. My family's taking care of me. I've got everything I need, right? Well, we know how the story just slowly chips away at her sense of self-sufficiency and completeness. She ends up desolate. God gives her a son. She loses the son. Then God raises the son from the dead. We think we're at the end of the story, but we're not. What is this epilogue? By the way, what do we think of when we think of an epilogue?
I think of The Fugitive, the
What's
old
that?
television show The Fugitive, because it always had the epilogue was the last little bit before the program ended.
And what did it do?
It would just kind of wrap up the story for
Okay.
that day.
Kind of tells what happens.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like when you're watching a movie at the end, you know, when the movie's over and you see what coming up on the
The credits rolling.
see the credits, but you also sometimes see information of what happened in these people's
That's
lives
right.
Yeah.
later on.
Like the
right?
resolution.
Now you look at these people's lives and what happened later on in light of what you've heard in the
That's
story, right?
And it gives you yet another story.
Another story, right?
Another layer to the story.
Now, I wonder, there's no mention of her husband. So in those 7 years, did her husband die? Because she's the one coming to the king, and you would think it would
That's
be her
interesting.
husband who's coming to the king. And I also wonder if there's any significance to the number 7 showing up again. Because we had 7 sneezes, and now we got 7 years of famine.
Yeah. And what were those 7 years in light of what was happening in Israel during the life of Elisha? What would those 7 years of famine have to do with the bigger story? What was God doing at that time?
Well, he was really dealing with the nation because of its idolatry.
Yeah.
And he had done a similar thing through drought, which produces famine
Right.
in the days of Elijah,
Right.
who had preceded Elisha.
Right. So the famine is directly related to God putting pressure on his people, bringing them to the end of themselves so that they would recognize that they've walked away from the one true God. They're embracing gods of their own imagination. And so God is using famine to bring a nation to its senses.
And this woman has endured that.
She's endured that. And how has she endured it?
Well, she endured it in the loss of her son. Now she has endured it in the loss of her property. But each time there's this restoration
Yeah, exactly.
that
Right.
takes place. And there's this almost hint of a promise there.
Right. Now, she didn't lose her son because of God's judgment, though,
No,
right?
no,
God
no.
was lovingly doing something.
In her heart.
In the middle of a time when God is judging the nation, here's an example of an individual that God is sustaining. He's providing for her. He's opening up her heart. He's showing things about himself that she never had dreamed before. And then as this 7 years of famine neared, Elisha tells her where to go to be safe. And then,
And she complies.
yeah.
She cooperates.
And so now at the end, through what appears to be simply coincidental, God supernaturally steps in and shows the rest of the story is
It's
again.
a great pop ending.
And so what she learns in the end is that all along she needed God far more than she thought she did. She needed help far more than she ever dreamed. And doesn't this remind us of really how the New Testament and the rest of the story of the Bible plays out? We have a God who is able to do for us, well, the Apostle Paul puts it in terms of exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or think. And yet he has a way of bringing us to that place of deep gratitude in ways that we never would have anticipated.
Yeah, that is so true, isn't it? When we take time to reflect on it, I think we can all come up with times when God has provided for us in unexpected ways. And I don't know, it just makes you feel both humbled and grateful at how God is at work in our lives, in the lives of those around us. Well, Mart and Elisa and Bill have one more 10-minute segment they want to spend on the stories of actually 2 different Shunammite women. In some ways, their stories have parallel plots, and so connecting the dots on 2 women in the Bible from Shunem. But first, another quick reminder about Artos Academy from Our Daily Bread Ministries. Now, because you're part of the group here at Discover the Word, I think I can assume that you have an interest in learning more about Bible study and theology and apologetics, spiritual growth, pastoral care, and leadership. And so the Artos Academy is also part of Our Daily Bread Ministries, and they offer courses on those kinds of topics and more. In addition to a library of over 260 courses, they also offer mentored certificate programs and a new diploma in ministry leadership. Plus, they have an online learning library with video and audio and books and more that support the courses. I hope you'll explore what Artos Academy has to offer. We'll include a link to their website in our show notes for this episode on our discovertheword.org website. Or you can also directly visit their website at artosacademy.org. That's artosacademy.org. Well, in this episode of the Discover the Word podcast, part 3 of 7 parts about the miraculous life of Elisha, we've been focusing on some important miracles that were part of Elisha's relationship with a family in Shunem, and especially the hospitality and relationship with the woman in that home. We've seen several miracles involving Elisha and this Shunammite woman. Well, to close this part of the story, Mark's going to make a connection to someone else who was from the town of Shunem. And so let's listen as they try to connect the dots between 2 women from Shunem and the miraculous life of Elisha.
If we say to someone, well, you have to connect the dots, what are we saying?
Well, it goes back to when you were a kid and you'd get coloring books, and some of the coloring books you'd have lines to fill in, and some of them it would only give you dots, and you had to connect them in order to get the picture so that you could then color it in, right?
And you can't tell what something is in a dot-to-dot picture until you connect the dots.
Yeah.
It just looks like a mishmash of dots on a page.
It has been decades since I've thought about doing that as a kid. I mean, I've used the word connect the dots a lot of times because there's a sense in which you can't live life without doing that.
Yeah.
Now, in those connect the dots books, there's a number with every dot, isn't there? So it's a way of learning their numbers.
And it's a fun surprise for them, too, I think, when they get it right at the end of the dot-to-dot-to-dot. There's a surprise of what the picture reveals.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think is happening in the Old Testament, in the story we've been talking about. We've been talking about the miraculous life of Elisha, and specifically, we've spent some days, actually the first 4 days, talking about Elisha's relationship with a woman of Shunem, which is a community in northern Israel. We've learned a lot about this woman, but one thing we know, she was from Shunem. Now, there's only one other woman in the Old Testament that we know is also from Shunem.
And they're called Shunamites.
Yeah, they're called Shunamites. But here's another woman from Shunem. She lived earlier, quite a bit earlier, but she's a completely different kind of person. And I'm just wondering if we can look at those two and kind of like connect the dots and compare the similarities and differences in their lives and see if we can figure out if this other woman from Shunem actually gives us another way of looking at the Shunammite woman that we've been considering this week, okay?
Okay, all right.
Have any idea who the other woman is?
No.
Okay. We've been in 2 Kings chapter 4, and then we jumped over to chapter 8 to kind of get the rest of the story for the Shunammite woman. What I want to do is go back to 1 Kings now in the Old Testament and read the story of a Shunammite woman whose name was Abishag.
It's a terrible name.
Abishag?
Do you know what it means?
No, I don't know what it means. It just sounds
The meaning
bad.
is worse than the word. It means my father is a wanderer.
Okay.
Or something like that.
A wanderer.
It's connected with the idea of
like
wandering.
a nomad?
Something like that, yeah. We don't know for sure. It's another dot that may have significance as we look at these 2 women from Shunem, okay? Let's start in 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. And Elisa, why don't you start?
King David was now very old, and no matter how many blankets covered him, he could not keep warm. So his advisers told him, "Let us find you a young virgin to wait on you and look after you, my lord. She will lie in your arms and keep you warm." And so they searched throughout the land of Israel for a beautiful girl, and they found Abishag from Shunem and brought her to the king. The girl was very beautiful, and she looked after the king and took care of him. But the king had no sexual relations with her.
Okay, now we're back in the days of David. Okay, David's an old man. He's so old he can't keep warm. So a woman, a young, beautiful woman, from Shunem is found to be a bedwarmer. Does that idea of her beauty have anything to do with the other woman of Shunem that we've been talking about?
What we know about her is she was well-to-do, but are we ever told she was beautiful?
No.
No?
But we're told she was rich.
We do see in her something of a beautiful spirit.
Oh, there is.
The spiritual sensitivity to want to open her home to the prophet Elisha. And so even though she may not be described as physically attractive, she does have an attractive spirit.
Yeah. And is it stretching things too much to say that the woman from Shunem that we first have talked about, she was blessed by God with wealth, with security, at least human security. This young woman is blessed with beauty.
Okay.
I mean, imagine growing up with that kind of beauty. I mean, if they searched the kingdom to find a beautiful woman for the king, she must have been gorgeous.
But you don't know if you want to really view that as a blessing or a curse. Because this is the king, she doesn't have a choice.
No. But how is beauty usually looked at? I mean, beautiful people are usually
Seen as blessed.
It's interesting. The rabbis have said it's ridiculous to think that this woman was just brought in to keep the king warm. They say, really, if you want to keep the king warm, all you had to do is give him more blankets and give him better fire. But what they suggest is that in reality, David was an old man. There was conflict between his sons for the throne. One of them, a son by the name of Absalom, had already tried to take the throne of his father. He ended up dying as a result of that. And now there's another son. And what they're saying is that really what was happening probably is this beautiful young woman was brought in probably to bear a child so that we can now have a legitimate heir to the throne.
So we don't have to deal with all the issues of the other sons. We
'cause
can
you
have a brand new
'cause you
one.
had Solomon as well as the one that you were talking about,
Right.
Adonijah. So with this kind of conflict, how do we settle this thing? Okay, let's get a third
Right.
child
Option
and,
here.
and make them the
Right.
chosen one.
And in fact, Adonijah, like his brother Absalom, had already just tried to declare himself or be declared the king and was found out. And he was stopped. And so David was told about it. Bathsheba got involved. And actually they named then Solomon to be the king. But there's all this
Palace politics.
and family conflict and national issues that are involved. Let's pick up then the story. This is after Adonijah had tried to make himself king, had been found out, and Solomon has been made king. But now let's pick up with verse 13. Bill?
Okay, we're reading from 1 Kings chapter 2, beginning with verse 13. One day Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, came to see Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. "Have you come with peaceful intentions?" she asked him. "Yes," he said, "I come in peace. In fact, I have a favor to ask of you." "What is it?" she asked. He replied, "As you know, the kingdom was rightfully mine. All Israel wanted me to be the next king, but the tables were turned, and the kingdom went to my brother instead, for that is the way the Lord wanted it. So now I have just one favor to ask of you. Please don't turn me down." "What is it?" she asked. He replied, "Speak to King Solomon on my behalf, for I know he will do anything you request. Ask him to let me marry Abishag, the girl from Shunem." "All right," Bathsheba replied. "I will speak to the king for you."
Elisa, just pick up reading here.
So in verse 19, so Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak on Adonijah's behalf. The king rose from his throne to meet her, and he bowed down before her. When he sat down on his throne again, the king ordered that a throne be brought for his mother, and she sat at his right hand. "I have one small request to make of you," she said. "I hope you won't turn me down." "What is it, my mother?" he asked. "You know I won't refuse you." "Then let your brother Adonijah marry Abishag, the girl from Shunem," she replied. "How can you possibly ask me to give Abishag to Adonijah?" King Solomon demanded. "You might as well ask me to give him the kingdom. You know that he is my older brother, and that he has Abiathar the priest and Joab the son of Zeruiah on his side."
Okay, and Bill, just how does it end now?
Not well. Then King Solomon made a vow before the Lord, "May God strike me and even kill me if Adonijah has not sealed his fate with this request. The Lord has confirmed me and placed me on the throne of my father David. He has established my dynasty as he promised. So as surely as the Lord lives, Adonijah will die this very day." So King Solomon ordered Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, to execute him, and Adonijah was put to death.
It's a very different kind of story, right?
it is.
A very different ending from what we looked at in the story of the Shunammite woman whose son had died but was resurrected and given back to her. And then beyond that, later in life, God provides for her and protects her in a time of famine, and it's very clear. Abishag what's happening with her life.
She's being passed around.
Remember, her name means my father is a wanderer.
Yeah,
It's
so
kind of
now-
like the story of her life.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is another little window on just how tough life was for women
Yeah.
in ancient times. Because here's this poor girl who did nothing wrong but be beautiful.
Yeah.
And what should have been a blessing became a curse.
Right. Imagine back home in Shunem what the rumors must have been.
Oh.
She must have been a joke. Look, they took Abishag to the king. She couldn't have a son by him. And then look at the son of David wants her to wife. He ends up dying. I mean, she's just a part
We
of
actually don't really know what happens to her, do we?
No,
The story ends with Adonijah, not with Abishag.
that's right.
And it's so interesting because with the Shunammite woman of Elisha's story, there seems to be a sense of completeness to her story. And with this Shunammite girl, it's anything but complete. It's left wide open, and you just have so much sadness.
Right. So let's look at it this way then. The earlier story is that of Abishag. It ends badly. It ends unresolved. It appears without an ending. The woman from Shunem that we read about in relationship to Elisha ends up, in a sense, redeeming the legacy of her own community.
Of women from Shunem.
Women from Shunem. So then it seems to me that if we do connect the dots, what we find at least is that in one story, that of Abishag, we find what it's like to find your life in the story of people who are simply using you. And in the other story of the Shunammite woman, what it's like to find yourself, to find your life in the presence of a Father, a God, who is our provider, who is our protector, who is a God who is using the events of our lives to ultimately reveal himself to us.
Two women from the same hometown. Interesting part of the conversation, connecting the dots in their stories. And, I don't think it's hard to find some of our own story woven into these narratives. We've all had struggles, and yet we've also all witnessed God's amazing provision in our lives. The miraculous life of Elisha, and how it leads us into how these two women from Shunem are part of the bigger story the Bible is telling. Great way to wrap up another hour with Marty Hahn, Bill Crowder, and Elisa Morgan on Discover the Word. And when we pick this up in the next episode, it's more miracles and the entrance of a man suffering from possibly the most feared disease of his day. Naaman had leprosy, and he is a super significant part of the story of the miraculous life of Elisha in a number of very surprising ways. And so we'll get into that in part 4 of this study in our next episode. Discover the Word is a small group Bible study from Our Daily Bread Ministries in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in which we invite you to walk with us through topics and passages that inform the way we read the Scriptures, challenge us as we live our lives as followers of Christ, and always point us to discover Jesus in the pages of the Bible. I hope you've been encouraged through our discussion of this episode. As I've said many times, you're more than just a symbolic listener. We consider you part of the team here at Discover the Word. That's your chair that's here at the table with us each day. And we also rely on friends like you to provide these conversations. When you support Discover the Word financially, you partner with us in making the life-changing story and wisdom of the Bible understandable and accessible to people all around the world. And giving a financial gift is simple. Just go online to discovertheword.org and look for the Donate button. That's up at the top of the page. Thanks. And thanks for listening. I'm Brian Heading. Discover the Word is provided by Our Daily Bread